Okay, so for those of you who did not see yesterday's video, around Valentine's Day, I found out I was pregnant. We were super excited. I'm not young by any means, so I had barely come to terms with the fact that I was done having kids. I'm 38 at the time, at the time that I found out I was pregnant, and it kind of blew my mind. Unfortunately, the complications that we had heard of initially continued to be an issue. And 2 weeks after that video was made telling Sky that I was pregnant, I ended up starting to spot. And it wasn't anything major, it wasn't anything heavy. It was just light spotting every now and again. But it didn't stop. I spotted for the entire day and called my OB and went into the ER that evening because the spotting wasn't getting any better. Both my partner and Sky were kind of worried and wanting to know what was going on. So they ended up doing another ultrasound there that night. And gave basically the same thing. It was still considered it was considered what they call a blighted ovum, where the fertilized egg never developed into a baby. So I basically had an empty sac in my uterus. But because of the way that it happens, your body still produces the hormones of a pregnant person. I'm going to pause it here for just a second and throw in some clips or some screenshots that I've got on blighted ovum and how common they are and whatnot. And I'll try to leave them on the screen for a few minutes or at least a few seconds so that you can see them. Because it is fairly common, just not anything that I had any instances of in the past. So I wasn't aware of that. So I'm going to pause you here for a second and I'll be back in just a second. Okay, so I've got those, like I said, it's a fairly common issue. I believe it said there were 200,000 cases a year. If I remember correctly, what my doctor told me was that it was one of the most common reasons for miscarriage. And he said it didn't necessarily mean that there was anything genetically wrong with the baby, just that something went wrong. So that being said, like I said, that Thursday, that was a Thursday that I went into the ER and they did that ultrasound. I ended up going in and seeing my OB on Monday because he was out of town that Friday. So Monday was when he was back in, and he basically confirmed what the hospital had found in the ultrasound. And based on my decision, he decided to go ahead, or I shouldn't say he decided, I decided to go ahead and have a D&C done. Just because at that point in time, he couldn't tell me. He said, the body would naturally miscarry because it wasn't a true pregnancy, but he didn't know when. It could take weeks, and that just hurt more. It's still quite raw. It's been 3 weeks and 1 day since I had the D&C done. But unfortunately for me, it wasn't just as straightforward as having the D&C done. Like I said, I saw the doctor on Monday. He wanted to schedule the D&C for the next morning, but I had another doctor's appointment that day that I didn't want to miss. So he scheduled my D&C for Friday, and my pre-op for Thursday morning, first thing in the morning. So Thursday morning, nothing seems to be simple for me, at least. Thursday morning, about 3 a.m., I started bleeding profusely and very, very heavily. To the point that I had gone through 3 changes of clothes from 3 a.m. to 7 a.m. just because I was bleeding so heavily and passing such large clots that even my cloth pads weren't able to handle the volume that my body was. Well, damn. Sorry, that was a notification on my phone. I'm recording on my tablet right now. It's got a better picture. But I started hemorrhaging, basically. Apparently I'm important right now. But I ended up going in for my pre-op, and while there, I was still bleeding so heavily that I was bleeding through my clothes and everything standing there for pre-op. They contacted the doctor. He sent over a prescription to help with the bleeding and to stop the bleeding, and said for me to go ahead and go ahead and come in for the DNC the next morning, and let him know if there was any problems with the bleeding not stopping. It took a couple of doses of the medication, but I did finally stop bleeding heavily anyway, to the point where I was no longer, anticipating bleeding to death. But I still bled for the next week after the DNC. Sorry, I have a cat to kill. Hold on. So, sorry about that. I have one liner in that room and another one over here on top of my dresser who is about to get hurt. Because they like to get into stuff and knock shit off my dresser. And, yeah, they're getting on my nerves right now. But anyway, we went in for the DNC. Like I said, it was 3 weeks yesterday. Today is Saturday, so it was 3 weeks yesterday. And I went in for the DNC. The doctor said that he was pretty sure I had passed probably the majority of it, of the uterine lining and everything when I had hemorrhaged the day before, but he was still going to go in and double check and make sure that there wasn't going to be any issues. While I was still out of it, he did come in and tell my partner and Sky that I had passed the majority of it, but he still had to do some scraping into the lining of my uterus because I hadn't passed all of it. So he still did have to do the DNC. So, needless to say, it's been kind of a very emotional roller coaster the last 3 weeks. And it hasn't gotten any better. But physically, I have been released from the doctor. He has said that as far as, any kind of physical activity, I am cleared to go back to any normal, whether it's exercise or, sexual activity. I've been cleared for all of that. So, emotionally and mentally is a whole nother story, and we're all still fighting that, and that's going to take a while. But, again, it's been kind of a rough month. So, this will be part 2 of what feels like a never-ending saga right now. But that's kind of what's been going on. So, if you have been wondering, because I did mention in a previous vlog that I had a procedure coming up, and that was right before I started hemorrhaging for the DNC. And I had done some taping and just kind of never mentioned it again. And just because I was having a hard time mentioning it. And I'm still struggling. But animals are driving me nuts. They're making me go insane. But it's a day-by-day process. And it will get better. It will get easier. But still, it's still emotionally raw for all of us. But I hope anybody else experiencing anything similar will see a light at the end of the tunnel and know that they're not in it alone. So if you've ever had any problems with miscarriages or pregnancy issues, please leave it in the comments below. You don't have to be specific, just, put your hand up basically, and just let us know.